Well, hello, everybody. We are back with Ryan and Brian from Undertaking the Podcast that you can find on any podcast platform for all things funeral related. Hey, guys, welcome.
Hey.
Hey. And I am
Pleasure to be here.
Kari the Mortician, as always, and you can find me all over YouTube with anything funeral related as well. So we are starting this video with a new series. We are going to be talking from the mortician, embalmer, funeral director perspective on some murder and unexplained death cases with some questions that have been presented to me. And I'm bringing them to the guys to bring them in on the conversation, since I know that their embalming skills are right up there. So we are going to talk over some cases I'm sure you've heard of. If you haven't, you're going to want to go Google them. You're going to want to Google regardless, because I'm not going to be showing a lot of the pictures and things that we are looking at behind the scenes, but you need to see, because if I show them in the videos, they kind of put the lockdown on my video, and I don't want that. So we want you guys to be able to hear the content and hear what we're discussing without getting, what's that called when they, lock me down?
Demonetized.
Not demonetized, but, they put censor. I don't want to be censored. So
we don't want you to be censored.
Yeah. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about these cases. But the first case I am bringing to the guys is the Watts family. This is Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, known as Cece, and Shanann's fetal baby, Nico, who were killed by Chris Watts. I hate to even say his name and give him another moment of priority, but they were killed out in Colorado. Shanann was pregnant when she was killed, and the little girls were thrown in oil drums. So this was, and still is, huge news. Netflix has done documentaries, I believe. It's just been an ongoing press fest with this story. But because of that, it has been a click on Kari's videos fest because of my embalming a pregnant woman video and my skin slit video, because these are two terms that come up a lot within the case. And so when a new Chris Watts thing comes out, a spike in my videos come out, and I finally realized what the correlation was. I'm going to give a quick synopsis to the case for anybody who hasn't heard some of the information. It's horrific, gets pretty darn dark, but we do need to talk over some of these facts for us to talk over some of what we're going to talk about. So Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico, they were found on August 16th, 2018 in an oil field in Colorado. So the Coloradonian, I can't even say the word of the newspaper, reports from Chris's testimony. Chris had strangled Shanann at home, drove the girls alive to the oil field with Shanann in the back. They saw him take her body out to the field, half-heartedly bury it, then went back, suffocated one of the girls with a blanket, went through her in an oil drum, and came back for the second girl, suffocated her as well with a blanket, went through her in the other oil drum. The Daily Mail reported the process of removing the girls' bodies from massive oil drums when they were finally found began at 5 a.m. on the morning of August 16th and went on for 14 hours, with a report that there was members that they noted that 6:45 p.m. they finally cleared the scene. They emptied all the oil from two 400-barrel tanks on the scene. And this is where Chris had worked. That's why he used this site as his dump site for these little girls and his wife. Then once they were emptied, the men went in with their gear and they removed the bodies of the little girls with skin coming off of them in the process, which is where that skin slip comes in, we'll talk about. The mother and unborn baby brother Nico were found in shallow graves. I've sent you pictures of the site. There's no pictures of the bodies, thankfully, on this one. So you can look at those pictures if you want it emailed over to you guys. The report reveals the diameter of the opening of the oil tanks was only 8 inches. I mean, that's little. That's why he couldn't put Shanann in one of the oil tanks, is because that opening was so little. Now, let's talk. I'm going to give a little bit from the autopsy reports, and then we're going to talk about the condition of their bodies and where we would have come in as funeral directors in each of those situations and what we might have done for care for their bodies. Now, Shanann exhibited, and this is all from the autopsy report, she exhibited mild to moderate decomposition. She had been out there for 3 days. They were murdered on the 13th. They were found on the 16th. She'd been out there for 3 days, exhibited bloating, discoloration, and skin slippage. So Brian, I'm calling on you. Define skin slippage for anybody who doesn't know what that is.
Okay, for all the human beings watching, we have 2 layers of skins, the dermis and the epidermis. And during decomposition, the layers, the proteins that hold the 2 layers of skin together start to decompose, and it allows for what we call slippage, because when you touch skin of a deceased individual, you can very easily slip it right off the top layer of skin. So the underlayer, the dermis, is still there, still intact, but it's that top layer that can easily slip away. So this is part of natural decomposition, and something that we see as funeral directors a lot.
So the report goes on to read, this likely represents prolapse of the uterus. So they had found her out partially covered by dirt, and they were looking at her genital area in this part. This likely represents prolapse of the uterus due to pregnancy and postmortem artifact. So portions were coming out of her genital area. Adjacent to the probable uterus is a largely degraded portion of tissue that is what that actual kind of situation of her birthing out the baby, and it's that term coffin birth, where a pregnant woman, you build up a pressure during decomposition that actually presses out the fetus as if you're birthing it. Because of the pressure that builds up in the stomach and the gastric area. And it looks like a birth. Typically, we don't see this often because someone would be buried, maybe that was unembalmed, and it would happen later. But if we get somebody who is deceased that's pregnant and the baby is still inside of her, deceased as well, the baby may be removed from the medical examiner or embalmed inside of her. Still, have you guys encountered a pregnant woman that you've had to embalm yet? It's kind of rare, which is great for every embalmer.
Yeah, not for me. It's very rare.
Awesome.
Never had that.
Well,
never
and I hope
explaining that coffin birth, that is very interesting. Idea.
People
It makes sense.
ask about it a lot, which is they think we see it often, I think, but it's not something that's going to happen while in our care because we're embalming. Mm-hmm. And either the baby's removed or the person's preserved. But when you have this, somebody buried for days, that happens. A lot of people bring up Lacey Peterson, who was killed, thrown in the water, and then they found her baby separate from her. But I don't know if that was per se a coffin birth or her body decomposed enough that the baby came out. I don't know if it came out vaginally or through, I don't know. There's not enough about that one for me to know for sure. But
well, for me, the reason we don't see this often is because the age of being pregnant is the age of an unnatural death, being by accident or homicide or suicide. Correct. So when that case, there's going to be an investigation, and that fetus would be removed during that process. So the opportunities for a coffin birth or even embalming with a pregnant lady is just not often. Very, very extremely rare.
Thankful for all of us embalmers that's the case for sure. So let's look at kind of just her. She's been out buried 3 days in the dirt in Colorado, and has this coffin birth, decomposed, skin slip, discoloration, going to have been autopsied. So we've kind of got this, a lot in front of us is kind of a mountain as an embalmer. Picture yourself going in for that embalming. What is, aside from that guy's a jerk, What are your thoughts kind of going in terms of where are you going to attack first to embalm?
Ryan, if I can kind of just set the stage and then let you take off there. The first thing we're going to do when we get someone into our care and into the care center is we're going to clean them. They're going to, come from the medical examiner or the coroner's office in a body bag or a pouch, generally, most of the time anyway. And so we need to assess the situation. So we call that the pre-embalming analysis, and that may take a while, but that everything that we're going to be doing, we're gathering information. Now, it's not necessarily verbally, depending if we're working by ourselves or with others, but we're going to need to clean the individual so to gather the most accurate information that we can. So that's where we start. Ryan?
No, I think you're right. You can find out an awful lot, just by giving someone a bath. Sometimes, when we get out on some of these scenes or we're in touch with the coroner, the immediate thing that's always said is they're not going to be able to see him or whatever else. Sometimes we get them back to the preparation room and start sanitizing, cleaning, giving them just a full body torso bath. You find out things may not be as bad as they are too. Sounds like in this situation, that's not the case. But something to think about, something that maybe doesn't get harped on quite enough is just a bath.
Agreed. It can clean off a lot of debris, blood, things that mask and make someone look a lot more traumatized by the incident than at first glance. I know we've gotten individuals over the course of years and are told by the medical examiner, there's no way they're going to be able to be viewed. They tell the family that, and we get them, and it's like, you just clean off the blood, maybe dust off some dirt and some glass, and they're okay, aside from needing a little bit of wax and cosmetics. Like you said, that bath really unmasks the reality sometimes of the situation.
I can say one of the things I'd probably do in that situation too is kind of feel around and palpate, down the head, down the body, and make sure everything is there. I think when it comes to decomposition and being out in the elements, depending on where they were at, they were in a rural area. There are there's some animal issues that may come into play. I think that has to be taken into consideration. I think you're going to have to step back in this situation and develop a game plan. This isn't something that you're going to necessarily be able to raise vessels and go. There's going to have to be a process, and a very well thought out process. Now, you're going to probably be dealing with a lot of discoloration, probably some fluid buildup interstitially, probably on the face. I don't know. Does it say anything like that? Like, what are some of her? Does it talk about that in the autopsy report?
It doesn't. It doesn't give any more specifics really about her decomposition and the situation. It doesn't really dive into that. And kind of disclaimer, we don't even know that Shanann was embalmed. We don't know what was done with her. Yeah. This is all kind of just conjecturing about what we might do in such situation with just the verbal information that we have. So know that we're not like saying anything happened or didn't happen or anybody did anything wrong. We just are talking about what we might do. But I think that animal predation and insects are a huge first that we kind of look for in there. What were you going to say, Ryan?
Brian, it comes up a lot, the idea of marbling. Talk about that within this situation.
Well, I mean, we're definitely going to, as we clean, we're going to note traumas. We're going to note the procedures done by the coroner, but we're also going to note the rate of decomposition. So a lot of these you can see visually, like the marbling Ryan talks about, and that's just a pattern of stain. And when I say stain, settling of the blood, the advancement of bacteria. Marbling is going to give us an idea of whether for an embalmer tissue gas, so the bacteria Clostridium perfungis is present, and that is it's a very big factor for us. So we're gonna weigh all of these things that we see and the information that we're gathered as we, like Brian said, build this game plan of how we go about embalming. So all of these things that we see, that we smell, and that we feel will provide us information to make decisions on how we go about embalming, how we go, kind of the next steps. And because when I want to say a couple things, because when there's decomposition in play in skin slip, that doesn't mean we can't embalm. That doesn't mean we can't view. Okay. We don't know that until we're finished with our process. And then we may not know that until we've had some extra time after the embalming process. But all that information circling around will provide us with the game plan of what type of fluids we use, because a body that has been deceased for some time, especially with decomposition, it's risky to the embalmer, because the body does not take embalming fluid as a regular human being would, because the vessels are breaking down and the system is not as intact and complete as we would like it. So what that means is we could have swelling. And we've had a lot of questions on the podcast is, why did Uncle John look, 50 pounds heavier? And that could be medical intervention. It could be the embalming too. So there's a lot of different factors when it comes to these outcomes.
It's kind of like a highway after a earthquake almost, where you have some fractures and breakages, and you can get pileups essentially as things go, and they just build up in certain areas, and you can't see it, you can't control it, but that vasculature is going to essentially melt when the body's decomposing, and parts of it are just gone, because it's very soft tissue and it's filled with the warmest thing in your body, which is blood. So it's going to go away pretty quickly when the body's decomposing. Ryan, you just looked like you were going to say something. Sorry.
Oh, no, I got lost in Brian's eyes when he was going on his diatribe. And then my question totally just went,
Gone.
But can I say this? Within those situations, friends, I mean, it sounds like in this situation, you've probably got some major trauma. You've probably got, you're going to have to worry about wetness with the decomp aspect of things. That's something that, to an embalmer, to a funeral director, to really anybody in funeral service, wetness is an absolute nightmare, especially if they're in the caskets. Brian and I, we've talked about this, and Kari, I think you've touched on this too, the idea of just a drop of water can just soak the inside of a casket.
The whole thing.
And
amazing.
What's that?
The whole thing. Like, it just spreads like insane. You just can't even imagine.
It's unreal. So, you're going to have to worry about wetness. Discoloration is going to be a big issue probably that you're going to have to deal with. Odor is something that's going to be very evident. You can tell a lot about odor. Mm-hmm. You can tell, honestly, what you can really, I think, identify how bad things are by what it smells like at times. So, it is what it is there. That's part of it. That's what it is we do. But,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think without seeing it, it's going to be hard to treat. I think we can talk about what we think may, maybe we'd be dealing with just from our past experiences. But either way, it would not be easy.
No. Well, I think so. I mean, the first part of what we do is preservation. I mean, that's always the key behind everything we're doing. I think as an embalmer is preserving who is in front of us. And we would probably try to inject very strong fluid and see if it went anywhere. And if it didn't, we would have to embalm from the outside in with fluid packs and with gels and wrapping, and then probably a full body plastic suit, which I've talked about, those plastic undergarments, if there was any viewability per se that we could really do, if we could dry her out enough to have a viewing, at least for the family from a distance, if there was a bad smell even. But it's hard to say if she was even viewable and identifiable to them at that point, if they could get her to that position.
What I will say is it's amazing though, where you think in some of these situations, if you don't try, let me first off by saying this, you've got to at least try. Mm-hmm. Brian and I had a situation a few years ago where, we had some major decomposition, and it was one of those things where we were trying something new, using some new equipment. And it turns out, he was able to at least show the family their loved one. And it's amazing how what you think what you don't think is going to happen actually does. So I would say in those situations, give it a try. I think that's something any embalmer, anybody that's in education would tell you too, is there's no harm in trying, but you'd be surprised sometimes.
Well, let's talk just for a minute about the fetus. We've dealt with fetuses, all of us, I'm sure, at different gestational stages. The baby, Nico, was, I believe, 15 weeks along, if I can find my notes. Not very big. But what do we know? What are babies mostly 98% made out of?
Water.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little tiny nugget. That breaks my heart.
Yeah. He's not very big to start with. He's made almost fully out of just moisture, water. Being in her warm womb, which is the first thing to decompose on a pregnant woman, is the uterus, is the placenta, where that baby is, because it's so warm. And then being out there for 3 days. So there's pretty much nothing, I would say, left of this baby that probably even looks like a baby at that point. So there's really not probably a lot aside from putting the baby in some fluid. And, I don't know. I couldn't find reports if the baby was buried with her, if Nico was buried with her or not. And nothing said anything about the baby the day of the funeral or anything. So I couldn't find anything about that. But there's another thing in her autopsy report I want to touch on, because I think this is so fascinating and important. So we'll see if you guys have heard about that. So one thing that's also discussed about her report is her blood alcohol level of 0.128, which is well over the drinking legal limit for driving. But she was pregnant, so why was she drunk? Have you guys ever read into this phenomenon?
I've heard rumblings of it. I have not done much reading on it, but my hypothesis would be a byproduct of decomposition. But tell me what you know. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I read over the reports that had come out about this, because I've heard about this, and there was a lot of conjecture about this, about if she'd have drank at this point. And there was this huge report by Thomas Millett, a forensic investigator, and he looked at, okay, if she had drank on the plane, because she had come home from a trip, she had got home about 2 a.m.-ish, and then the murder had happened during the night. And then, so they kind of played out all the hours and where that blood alcohol level would have gone based on if she'd have drank and this and that and the decomposition. And he came to find, he said that all of her blood alcohol level was from the fermentation after death synthesis of the alcohol level in her body. So your body creates a natural alcohol level after you die because of the bacteria and the yeast that built up in your system. And that's why her blood alcohol was so high. And he ran every scenario, like the report's long, but it's really interesting to read different hypotheses about it. But he said, I've run every scenario, and this is the one that lands the numbers where they need to be, because if she would have drank, it would have been up towards 0.17 or higher. It was really interesting. I really had never delved into anything like that until this case. So yeah, fascinating.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, now you know. You don't know what you don't know. Didn't know I needed to know about that until today. That's right.
I knew she had gone out with her friends because of that. It's in that documentary. But yeah, I wouldn't have ever thought I just wouldn't have thought that.
Who knew? So let's go over to the girls, because this is an area, this is brand new to me as well, some of this. So the girls' autopsy reports, essentially a lot of it the same. The bodies exhibited mild postmortem artifact consisting of generalized bloating, areas of marbling, skin discoloration, and skin slippage. During the washing process, the majority of the skin is sloughed from the surface. We talked about skin slip already. Trooper Reader grasped, this was reported, Trooper Reader grasped the upper portion of the first child's right arm, then lifted her by both arms as he held her right leg. Trooper Reader held her left arm and left leg as he moved her toward the manway. The victim was then removed out, and as she was, her hand was degloved of its skin. So Ryan, define degloving for me, because this is a term. It's nothing we want to ever see, but tell us about it.
a degloving. We get these in motorcycle accidents a lot. As a paramedic now, I've had a few cases as a funeral director as well. But what it is basically the top layer of skin of your hand comes completely off and leaves that second layer of skin there, and it comes off like a glove. So you can hold it up and basically put your hand back in it if you want to. It's a glove. I mean, it's literally a glove of skin that it comes right off. So it's disgusting. It really is. That's horrible. Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. And to think for a child, I mean, it's just it in general, but then to think of a little, that's just, I try not to think of the context of some of that, having little girls, and I just can't even.
Yeah.
So that skin was retrieved and given to law enforcement. And then the second little girl, the report notes, during this extraction, there was some skin slippage where he had to touch the victim's body. There was also some skin on the plywood where her back had made contact. Skin was lost while the body was being moved to the oil pool. So they had made these pools to transfer the children right into, because they knew when they found them, they were going to need to get them right into something. And they had created these little pools. There was also skin, blah, blah, blah. So, we've got extreme skin slipping on both these little girls. They've also been covered in oil for this whole duration. Then they go for autopsies. Then they're moved back to the funeral homes. So we've got this oil component that I've never buried anybody that was in a big thing of oil before. Have you guys?
No, thankfully, no.
I mean, that's, I think, something that there's not really precedence on yet, but what are some first initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're going to do about the same as you're going to do with, our first example is you're going to bring them into your care. You're going to bathe. In a case with oil, though, I imagine you're probably going to pull out the Dawn dish soap. I mean, that's what they used during the oil spill to clean up animals that were alive. I mean, it's gentle. It breaks down oil. So I think that's my first thought as a go-to is that. So you got to do some cleaning, and then you're going to assess the situation. So I just feel so bad for those girls and even those funeral directors.
Yeah.
Kari, let me ask you this. Within the autopsy, were there any bones that were broken or anything like that? You talked about them going into an 8-inch opening.
Mm-hmm. They had scrapes on them, it said. I mean, they're little girls, so they pretty well fit. They were very small statured. So he fit them in. They had some scrapes and stuff, no break or anything like that to speak of. So there was no really other trauma aside from the suffocation and, just him holding, I think, that blanket over them and some kind of facial stuff. There really wasn't much else to speak of. So they had their clothing on and, their jammies because he had taken them out of their bed. So yeah, I'm not going to even think about that part. Focused on the work, which is what we have to do. I feel like when you go into that, I can't even imagine these funeral directors, God bless them I can't imagine having to handle all of that and in such a public spotlight too.
Yeah. So I'm going to hypothesize that being in the oil, submerged in the oil, being that it's so caustic, is increase the likelihood of skin slip all over. So I would imagine it's going to be much worse for the little girls than it would be for their mother, being that she was not in the oil. But so it's going to present different challenges to us. But when it comes to embalming, once we have them cleaned up, we're still going to assess the situation. We do need temporary preservation. We need tissue to be firm and dry. And in all cases, though, I believe the autopsy is going to help our process as embalmers all the way through.
Very true. Well, and I know that autopsy report said basically all of their skin had come off during the autopsy because of how fragile it was. So I can't even imagine. I have cared for somebody that was in a similar substance that they had gone in, and very thick, and it gets very warm. That was something that was a challenge when we had them, is that it gets really hot in those big drums with a big thick solution in it, and the heat levels decompose them even more rapidly, that just swells that tissue layers and gets that heat, and it's just a hot mess. And it's very much an uphill battle that you just don't feel like you could win. But so, well, looking at two other areas of this, I know. So with the girls, they reported they had to have a bigger coffin. People magazine, bad reporting, it's a casket, people. And they had to seal it with a certain wrap so that the gases wouldn't get out. So the crude oil being in there for 3 days, they were super flammable. The family had asked about cremation and they said they couldn't cremate them because of the oil. And so they did bury them, but they had to have a full-size casket because they had to pack them and wrap them a certain way. I'm not sure, because looking at the caskets, Shanann was in a wooden caskets and the little girls were in steel caskets. And I'm going to guess because they could seal, possibly to keep in some odors for the girls, but I would think that the smell would be the same for both. I don't know. One of my first thoughts was putting the girls together in a casket, because I think we see that when there's accidents with children and parents, or, you know, that you want them, I don't know, it's that big casket and a little child. It would be nice to have them together, but if they possibly left them in their bags or, you know, wrapped them up accordingly or something, it would have taken up more space. So maybe they couldn't fit them both because they had 3 full-size caskets at the funeral.
Wow. I mean, it's hard to Monday morning quarterback this, being that we're not there and see, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's very possible when it comes to the smell and the sealed caskets for the young ones. I'm going to guess that it's the smell of the oil.
Yeah.
That maybe it was absorbed more than we realized.
Yeah, maybe couldn't just wash it off.
And maybe it couldn't just be washed off, because when I think about cremation, well, what if we cleaned them up? I mean,
yeah,
that situation has never come this way. So,
yeah. And they had to fly them. They had to fly them too, from Colorado. They were buried back in North Carolina. So that was also part of it, is flying them back, and the smell and the flammability, possibly. I don't know if flammability is a word, but.
Well, I mean, if they were too combustible to cremate, then it makes me wonder about the airlines. So something doesn't just quite add up for me. But again, not being on scene, I don't know.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just have to see them to make any determination about that. Because, you know, I think right now, well, yeah, why not embalm? Why not try? But I've never had anybody that's been in an oil drum for 3 days, you know, in the middle of Colorado, you know, so I don't know what that would look like.
Yeah. Now, one other key thing that got brought up, which I think a lot of people don't think about, is the logistics of who's in charge. So you have Shanann, who has died, who is the mother to these kids. You've got the father is in jail. So who gets to decide what happens with these little girls? You've got 2 sets of grandparents.
Not the father.
Yeah. So thankfully in Indiana, it's very clear under Indiana law that if you have been charged with, the murder of your next of kin, you lose your rights.
Yes.
You lose your rights, even if you're just charged. So, but it does create an interesting dynamic, because in this way it would go equally to both sets of grandparents. And I hate even say normally. Ideally, I think you would hope that one set would step back. But yeah, that's tough.
And that's what happened. Shanann's father, Frank, reported, we got permission from the Watts side of the family to have the grandchildren and to bury our grandchildren with their mother. So everybody, you know, kind of got on the same page and was able to do what was good for the grandkids at that point, which is how we would love to see it. But that you do enter these situations where you do have kind of this thing, and then you have grandkids, and then you have the basically murderer's parents and the maybe parent or something's parents. And if they don't get along, then you have these little girls in limbo in this court battle over who gets possession of them for the burial, which is just a sad thing on top of a horrific incident, so to speak. So, well, summing this one up, Chris pleaded guilty to their murders and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that was for all 4, because they did charge him in Nico's, I don't think it was as murder, but some, fetal to the detriment of a fetal. So he was charged on 4 counts there. So yeah, we know where
that's a tough story, Kari. That's a tough story, man. I tell you, I've not done the intense research that you have, but watching that documentary and seeing the interviews and it was, I mean, I've got 3 little girls and it just made me want to throw up. You know what I mean? And that's the thing is just what a tough situation, a tough story, a lot of probably treading softly when it comes to being a funeral director there. So think about that, being in their shoes as well, having to walk those waters. I can't imagine sitting with those grandparents and making those arrangements and trying to appease everybody there, and still deal with the traumatic aspect of it, but also the added stress of what you're doing to provide the service too. It just, I'm sure, golly, I couldn't imagine.
Well, and knowing, it's not just caring for them, but you also have this circus of media going on around you, which if you've dealt with the media at all as a funeral director, it can just be overwhelming on its own with the phone calls and the knocks and the people trying to, low man on the totem pole at the news station that day. Hey, go over and knock on their door and see if you can get anything today, and then go tomorrow. And then the dad being, arrested and that happened. I can't even, God bless them. That's just the worst. I can't even imagine. Thankfully, we don't all see that during the course of our careers, hopefully. So, well, this sums up our first edition of some embalmers talking about murders and unexplained deaths and maybe what we would do in some of those situations to care for the deceased. So thank you, Ryan and Brian from Undertaking the Podcast. You can find them on any podcast platform. Check me out on Kari the Mortician as you are right now. Click on some more videos, click subscribe. So we'll see you guys on the next edition of this new series. Bye.
Toodles.